everyone. My name is Kristen Russell. I know some of you were here for Rebecca's last session, and I know it was awesome, but I'm pumped to have you for another hour of test review. Let me know that you can see and hear me by saying hello down below. How's everyone doing? Hey, Brandon, Zach, Draven, awesome. Looks like we have a pretty good group tonight. Now, the first and most important question I'm going to ask you is, have you taken full length 3? Please tell me down below. I want to make sure everyone has taken this. Good, good, good. Brandon's taken it, Zach's taken it, awesome. If you have not taken it yet, please come back to this session later. It's important that you take your full lengths before you attend the test reviews. Now, this is a test review. Of course, that's what it says. But as you guys probably know, if you have attended one of these before, we're not going to review every single question. So I'm hoping that most of you have already done some independent reviews. So let me know down below if you've made your Why I Missed It sheets for full length 3. Have you done your own review of full length 3 and made your Why I Missed It sheets? It's okay if you haven't, just let me know so we can talk about it if we need to. All right, Brandon has not. Well, do you know what a Why I Missed It sheet is? Does that ring a bell? Do you have no idea what I'm talking about? All right, so you know what it is. It's something that you're definitely going to get a lot of use out of. I know it takes you a long time. If you've made one before, it looks like Brandon has. They're going to take you, anywhere from 7 to 14 hours to make a Why I Missed It sheet for the entire test. As you go to the test reviews, it's really helpful if you already start to have a pattern of your own performance. We're going to go through select passages and questions tonight, really focusing on some specific strategies and kind of repracticing some things that you have already learned. So what we're going to focus on tonight is navigating a passage with a specific eye on proper nouns and some sequence keywords we're going to see throughout. We're also going to focus on looking at certain topics, tones from the author, looking at rhetorical questions, and how we can pick up on what the author thinks. Then at the end, we're going to pay close attention to what makes a good answer. I know we've spent lots of time in other CARS lessons talking about what makes wrong answers wrong, but there are also certain things about correct answers that are typically going to be true, and sometimes this will change based on what type of question we're dealing with. So let's go ahead and dive right in to a passage that I know you've seen before, but we're going to be covering it today with the specific focus of proper nouns and numbering. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking for. So proper nouns, peoples, places, things, dates would be kind of something that you could throw into this group too. Things that are details, but are going to be really helpful if you need to come back to them for a question. So what should we do when we see a name? We don't necessarily do it every time we see the name, but the first time we see a name, what should we do? Highlight, Kaylin, absolutely. Now, I want to remind you that one of the benefits of the new style of the AAMC interface is that when you highlight, if you accidentally leave the passage and then come back to it, your highlighting will remain. You will also be able to highlight in the question stems themselves. So if you, see a name in a question stem and you want to highlight it so you know that you need to, go back to a certain area, you can do that and then look for the highlighting in your passage as well. So another thing we want to pay attention to are the opinions or activities of the people that are being discussed. Now, if it's the author, you're obviously not going to see the author's name written. You're going to have to pick up on that on your own. But if you see certain people being discussed, we want to know what relates to those people. So if we're asked about them, we know what they were dealing with. Now, of course, you're going to see these details. You're going to see quotes from people. You're going to see names, dates, places. Ultimately, you want to ask yourself, why was this included? How does this relate to the overall topic? So this is when you're going to think back to your goal of the passage. Now, sequencing can also be pretty important. You've probably seen different types of passages where the structure is different. Maybe the first paragraph introduces a topic, second paragraph starts to talk about the first point, third paragraph the second point, and so on. So picking up on that sequencing is going to help you determine the structure, and it's going to help you determine where you're getting detail and where you're getting something new. So start looking for those order of events and those words that are going to stand out to you first, second, third, lastly, finally, and so on. All right, so let's dive into this myth passage. Tell me quickly down below, when you were taking this full length, what did you think of this passage? Was this an easy, medium, or hard? What did you think of it? Brandon says easy. Draven says easy. All right, this one wasn't so bad. So we probably understand what this one's about, so we can really spend some time focusing on different keywords and how we can use them. So the first paragraph, myth is a word laden with meaning, particularly in Ireland, which has an often destructive, almost cult-like dependence on mythology, in particular. So now we're getting more detailed. Ireland's mythologizing of women has altered its perception of everything female, beauty, sexuality, voice, and intelligence. So what's important here? What's important here? There, very good. Okay, so we're getting a negative view. Brandon's saying myths in Ireland affect perception of female. So in this case, where we're starting to get more detailed with this in particular, we're starting to get to really the point of what the author is trying to emphasize. So that's absolutely it, Ireland's mythologizing of women. Okay, so we know what the topic is. Let's keep going. Irish myths affect this perception in three main ways. So we talked about seeing structure like this. We can anticipate three things coming up. So first, the myths marginalize women. The Irish identify with the mythical heroes and heroines in the Deirdre, Grania, and Cuchulainn stories. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but we'll go with it. This is dangerous in its exclusion of otherness and particularly in its exclusion of real women. So you can see here we're paying attention to those three things, what they are, and then any proper nouns as they come out. The contemporary poet Evan Boland explains that she does not recognize herself in Irish myth and literature throughout the ages, citing this as among her main reasons for demythologizing Irish literature. Okay, so what's the main point of this second paragraph? What's the main point of this second paragraph? What would you put into your passage outline? Tell me down below, what would you throw into your passage outline? Or what did you if you have your notes handy? See some people typing. Give you a couple more seconds here. All right, Albana says marginalized women. Yeah, so we're getting here the first of the three main ways discussed, and then we're getting more details on Boland. Very nice. So again, if we throw the names in our highlighting, we can make a quick reference to them in our passage outline. We can come back and get more detail if we need it. All right, let's use what we've read so far to go ahead and attack a question here. Suppose that future studies show that some female writers use Cuchulainn and other mythic heroes to describe men. The author would probably revise her essay by. Okay, so first here we are going to do what? What's our first step in our question strategy? What are we doing? Yeah, we're assessing the question, okay? Yeah, and I like how you guys are taking a look at the answer choices. Now, of course, in cards we don't read the answer choices, but if we recognize a quick pattern, that can help us. So we see suppose that future studies. So we're getting something added here. Now we're asking how the author would revise her essay. So what's important in this question stem that we're going to need to come up with a prediction here? What's important? How do we know what we're looking for? So Kaylin says putting men in the same marginalized category as women. So we're trying to figure out how is Cuchulainn used here, and how is that going to impact what we already know, right? So if we go back and look, we had it highlighted. This is the part where we're talking about those mythical heroes and heroines and how this is marginalizing women. Now, if we're talking about female writers using these to describe men, does that change what we've already said about women? Is that really changing anything? No, it's not. So what do we get rid of right away? Yeah, so removing all references, I like it. You guys are picking up on the extreme here. Do we need to remove anything, though? No, we don't, because ultimately this isn't changing anything about our argument for women. If anything, it's adding to the argument about being mythologized, but it's adding that reference with men as well. So our correct answer here has got to be answer choice B. Now, this question is a good example of how you can use strategy with your narrowing it to 50-50 by using those words. Because we highlighted when we read through, we could quickly locate what we're looking for. Now, in this example here, there's quite a bit highlighted. If you're actually going through on test day, I would not highlight quite this much. I like to save my highlighting for these words that we talked about, these proper nouns. So I would have probably highlighted these three things. I'm circling them now so you can see. I would have highlighted first here so I could find it quickly, and Boland. But you want to save your highlighting so that it really does catch your eye when you come back to it for the questions. So let's keep reading in this passage. All right, so second, we're getting our second main point that was introduced in that last paragraph. Second, Ireland's historical reliance on myths created a patriarchy from which women are excluded. Okay, so this is about patriarchy. The critic C.L. Innes, okay, we're going to highlight that name, describes nationalism as a challenge to the authority of the father, the colonial power. The patriarchy also asserted its power through its images of Ireland as a woman. Through colonial times, both England and Ireland saw Ireland as a lady in distress, needing rescue from the Irish nationalists or the English John Bull, respectively. Ireland's rigorous Catholicism hailed the cult of the Virgin, associating womanhood only with purity and motherhood. All right, there was quite a bit of detail in there. What's actually important in this paragraph? Kaylin says, boys club. Yeah, it's patriarchy here. We're seeing the woman in distress. We're seeing all of these examples. But we know what we're supposed to highlight. We're highlighting that we're getting the second main idea. It's about patriarchy. And we have these people here, right? Okay, so I agree completely. Patriarchy is what we're going to throw into our passage outline. Now, we can anticipate what's coming here, more on those three themes. Highlighting this marginalization, Maud Gonne, a radical nationalist who tirelessly worked for a free Ireland and women's rights, is primarily remembered as William Butler Yeats' muse. His poetic images of her beauty and femininity flood Irish literature, while her true tenacity and vigor is lost on history. All right, did we get that third theme we were expecting? We didn't. What is this here for? Why is this here? Yeah, we're getting an example, Brandon, absolutely. So we'd want to pay attention to Maud Gonne here, and this is an example of a woman remembered for the wrong thing. So Yeats is going to be important here, and Maud Gonne herself. Very nice. All right, let's tackle a question now utilizing that last paragraph. William Butler Yeats is arguably Ireland's most famous poet. If true, this, okay, so we're saying Yeats is really, really popular. Well, how was Yeats important? Before we look at any of the answer choices, tell me, how was Yeats important? We just read about it. What's important here? Yeah, Kaylin diminished Gonne's place, remembered Gonne for the wrong reason. And now that we're saying Yeats is super, super famous, is that going to strengthen or weaken what the author had to say? Yeah, absolutely, you guys. It's going to strengthen. So before we really read any of these answer choices, we've narrowed it down to 50-50. We're getting it down to C and D. Okay, so from here, C, strengthens the author's argument that Maud Gonne's pervasive image creates a skewed view of womanhood. Does that fall in line with what we outlined for passage 4? Does that fall in line here? Is the reason that Yeats was included for a discussion of Maud Gonne? Yeah, absolutely. This is completely in line with what we're looking for. We don't even need to take a look at answer choice D. If you're the type of person that feels like you just have to look to feel confident moving forward, let's look at D. Now, Kaylin, That's fine. And if you picked wrong answer choices, now is the time to do it. When you're taking practice tests, that's totally the time to do it. So let's look at D and figure out what the problem is. D, strengthens the author's argument that Yeats's fame obscured the historical truth. Now tell me this, was the point of the fourth paragraph for the author to argue that Yeats was famous? That's the key here. Was that why the author talked about Yeats? No, it wasn't, right? What we're actually seeing here is that the new piece of information that's included in our question stem is telling us that Yeats is famous, right? Now we're talking about why the author would have included this in this specific passage, and it was to highlight Maud Gonne and how this is an example of how the author can change how someone is remembered, okay? Yeah, absolutely. Brandon says, can you say that history is too broad of a term? Yeah, I mean, honestly, Brandon, I totally agree with that assessment as well. Obscured historical truth. This isn't really in line with the topic of the overall passage, which is to look at, how women are viewed. So this is too broad. Now, in C, we see skewed view of womanhood, which is exactly in line with the topic of this passage. So that's a great point as well, Brandon. Very nice. All right. Let's keep going. We have more to read here. So the patriarchy also creates gendered language. Okay, so we're getting more on this patriarchy theme. Julia Kristeva, another important person we're going to highlight, the famous French feminist, saw the need for a new language that could change the unconscious prejudice in a patriarchal society. This language would describe what has been repressed in patriarchal language, the reality of women. Realizing that the language must be usable in a society with two genders, she did not champion an equally egregious language absolved of an opposing male language. Instead, Kristeva urged women to see the opposition within themselves, the male and female side of themselves, to spur the creation of a double discourse. Okay, what was important here? Quite a bit of detail again. What's important? Tell me what you'd put into your passage outline. Yeah, so we're getting this Kristeva view and the new language to bring in women here, but her main idea being that we should embrace it all, as Kaylin's saying. Very nice. All right, paragraph 6. Now we're getting that third consequence. We knew it was coming. The third consequence of Irish myth is objectification. Women are surveyed both by men and by themselves. In his article, Ways of Seeing, John Berger, we'll highlight his name, points to the duality that makes women the surveyor and the surveyed, masculine and feminine. Society's subconscious messengers, goddesses staring down from portraits, models staring vacantly from magazine pages, tell women they are being observed and that they should observe themselves. Women are voyeurs by proxy. This meta-perception is colored by women's knowledge both consciously and unconsciously of the muse whom they are supposed to imitate. So we had this third idea here. We had some examples, but the big picture theme, this third consequence, is the objectification idea here. So women are the surveyor and the surveyed. All right, let's try another question here. John Berger's thesis would most aptly fit which of the following scenarios? So what type of question is this? What type of question is this? Yeah, Brandon, this is an apply question. Now, Kaylin, you can think that you're having to infer something, but because our answer choices are all new situations, we're going reasoning beyond the text in an apply style question. Okay, so before we start looking at these answer choices and kind of getting confused here, let's make sure we know what we're looking for. So how do we summarize John Berger's thesis? What is John Berger's thesis? Okay, so Brandon says women watch other women in media to see how they should act. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And Albana says women seeing herself and other women. Okay, so Berger's thesis, if we truly go back to what was discussed, we can see that John Berger points to a duality that makes women the surveyor and the surveyed. Okay, so the surveyor and the surveyed. If they're being surveyed, who's watching them? Who's watching them? Yeah, men. Yeah, men and themselves. That's absolutely what we're looking for. So it's important that we pay attention to the fact that men are watching women and women are watching themselves. So when we start looking at our answer choices, we want to make sure we're focusing on that idea. So go ahead and take about 15 seconds to get your answers into the poll on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. All right, I'm going to close it up, get your answers in 3, 2, and 1. All right, I like what I'm seeing. I'm going to go ahead and broadcast. About 84% of us here, we're all about answer choice D. Now let's talk about how we got there. It looks like all of you were able to eliminate A and B. Tell me why we can get rid of those pretty quickly. Why can we get rid of those pretty quickly? Kaylin says no dudes, and that's totally right. Men are not involved, so we can get rid of them because we know they were the surveyed and the surveyor. Okay, between C and D, it gets a little tricky. So C, a man watches a woman looking at a painting of Venus on a half shell. What's wrong with C? What's wrong with C? Yeah, the woman wasn't watching herself, right? She's looking at a painting. D is a better answer here. A woman watches a man watching her, okay? So the woman is watching the dude watch herself. So this is perfect for being the surveyor and the surveyed. So almost all of us got this one. It is tricky, but again, make sure you know what you're looking for before you start reading through because it's really easy to convince yourself that any of these sound right. Kaylin, yeah, maybe in this case it might be needed. All right, let's keep going. We still have more of this passage. It was a long one. So in an effort to combat this mythology, we're back to Bolin now, Bolin pioneered a new poetic lyric. Through a new language, Bolin strips away the facade of the muse and presents the reality of Irish womanhood. Bolin's poetry, in her own image, is stark, urgent, blunt, and in other words, anti-lyric. Unable to create women's voices in the lyric poets typically use, Bolin created this short, fragmented poetry. The language is staccato. Each line is typically a few words long. There is no regular rhyme or meter. In her own image, concentrates intensely on individual women. In Bolin's new anti-lyric language, the women speak about sexual desire, menstruation, anorexia, and mastectomies. Female sexuality is celebrated alongside a strong condemnation of society's destruction and femininity. Bolin gives Irish women a voice that slashes through mythology. All right, again, lots of detail in here. What's the big picture important stuff? Okay, yeah, staccato, getting to real women. This is all about Bolin. And the big picture here is in an effort to combat this mythology. So we're using new language here to demythologize what we're looking at about women. Now, there's one more piece of the passage outline that we're missing. What do we still need? The goal. Absolutely. So tell me down below, what is the goal? What is the goal? See a bunch of you typing. What do we got for our goal? Brandon says to discuss mythology of Irish women and attempts to demythologize them. Kaylin says to show how women were marginalized and demarginalized across the pond. I like it. All right, that's awesome. So I like how you said to show, to discuss. we're not really getting a strong argument here, so we want something that is kind of, we're analyzing this, we're describing it, we're discussing it, all of that is correct. So we're describing 3 ways that Irish myths are unfair to women, and we might add here, I like that you guys are talking about how we're also demythologizing them. So describing 3 ways that these myths are unfair and how Boland is overcoming that, okay? All right, let's take a look at question 23 that's talking about Boland. Even Boland sees national traditions as a means to edit out complexities which do not suit the nation's program. How could this fit into the main idea of the passage? Now, what in this question stem stands out to you as important? What stands out as important here? Tell me what words in our question stem are really important before we dive in. Okay, so Kayla, we might look at edit out. We know we're dealing with Boland, and there's one part in the last sentence of the question stem. How could this fit into the main idea of the passage? Okay, the main idea of the passage is going to be really important to help us get this. So I want you to think about what that main idea is and utilize that to answer into the poll. So I'll give you about 15 seconds here. And close it up in 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to show you how you did. Oh, it looks like we lost it. But I can tell you, 80% of you were all about answer choice B. So again, let's focus on the big picture idea. What was even Boland all about? Well, we know Boland was all about trying to demythologize women. So we know this had to do with women. That was the overall topic here. So answer choice B is absolutely correct. It was right on the money. All right, let's take a look at another. In her poem, Tirade for the Mimic Muse, Even Boland dramatizes a confrontation between a female muse and herself as the poet. In the context of this passage, this would most likely show. All right, reword this for me. What is this question really asking? What is this question really asking us about? Yeah, Kaylin, very nice. How does Boland prove this point? Okay, so Boland dramatizes a confrontation between a female muse and herself as the poet. Now, the whole point of this was to demythologize women. So make sure you keep that in mind when you tackle this question, right? Is there anything we can get rid of right away that definitely is not in line with what Boland thinks? Yeah, A, we can get rid of how the muse mimics real women. We know that that's not the case. We actually said it's the opposite. What other answer choice can we get rid of pretty quickly here? Anything else? Yeah, B, Brandon. What's wrong with B? What's wrong with B? Yeah, it's out of scope. Absolutely. The whole point of this, the whole point of Boland is to demythologize women. This is very, very general. It's not dealing with the specifics of this question. All right, so we've got 2 remaining. How mythical women inhibit the growth of female consciousness, or how the poet destroys the image created by mythical women. All right, go ahead and get your answers in for me. Get them into the poll. And I like what I'm seeing here. Some of us look like we're not too sure, and that's okay because we're going to talk about them. Now, Kaylin points out that D is extreme. Is it okay for an extreme answer to be correct here? Is that okay? Tell me why that's okay. Why is that okay here? Because Boland was extreme with this issue, right? Boland was all about demythologizing women. We were pretty specific with what we were looking for here, and the idea was that we wanted to take away that aspect of the mythical woman. So D is the only answer choice that really gets at what Boland was trying to do. Very nicely done here. All right, let's try another one. Which of the following is not given by the author as a reason for questioning Ireland's dependence on mythology? Okay, what is this question really asking us to do? What is this actually asking us to do? This one should be pretty quick. Yeah, what does the author not use as justification? So we're using our 3 points, right? So we can go back and quickly look through those 3 points. We had objectification, marginalization, and creation of patriarchy as our 3 ideas. So our correct answer here has got to be answer choice D. It's that fast when you get questions like this, you want to tackle them immediately. All right, as our second learning goal here, you guys rocked out on the first one. Let's pay attention to adverbs, rhetorical questions, and figuring out what the topic of paragraphs are. So we're going to dive straight in here talking about how we would tackle a rhetorical question, how we know what it means for us, right? So adverbs are going to be important. Tell me what adverbs are going to tell us about a paragraph or a passage. Yeah, so adverbs are adjectives for verbs. And who are they going to tell us about? When we see adverbs, who do we generally get information on? The author, Albana, absolutely. They're giving us tone, they're emphasizing certain things. We can get positive or negative from this. Now, rhetorical questions. Obviously, they're going to end with a question mark, but what do they tell us? What do they tell us? When we see a rhetorical question, what do we know? Yeah, we're gonna get the answer, Kaylin. Absolutely. When we see a rhetorical question, we can expect the answer to that question to be a main component of that paragraph. Now, topic sentences, we're typically going to be finding these at the beginning of the paragraph, and this is just going to give us a good idea of what the focus for the rest of that paragraph is going to be. Now, that's not always going to be the case, so make sure you are reading and utilizing keywords to figure out what the topic is if it's not in the first sentence. All right, let's tackle passage 6 here. I know you guys have seen this one before, so we're going to go a little bit more quickly as we're reading through. The diversity of moral views has always been an obstacle in the search for objective moral principles. Societies around the world with radically different standards of justice conflict with each other in a fundamental way. They cannot all be correct, but it is difficult to choose among them without presuming the validity of a particular cultural standpoint. What's important here in our first paragraph? What's important in this first paragraph? Kaylin pulls out a keyword, always. Very nice. What's the main idea? Yeah, it's hard, right? We have a lot of strong words here, always, radically, and ultimately we're saying that finding this objective moral principle can be a challenge. Very nice. All right, let's keep going here. So our second paragraph. Deliberative universalism is a recent school of thought that attempts to respond to this moral problem. What do we think's coming up in the rest of this paragraph? Yeah, a definition, an explanation, absolutely. And you guys have read this before. So really we're just kind of practicing it, pulling out where we're going to get those topics. I know you guys have seen it. What we're saying here is there must be a set of core values, but there are also things that may be common, but not always in all cultures, right? So core values can transcend, some things may be different. So now we see a question at the beginning of our next paragraph. How do deliberative universalists account for differences in moral standards? What do you think we're going to get in the rest of paragraph 3? The answer to that question. And if we read, their response is best illustrated in comparison to two alternative moral theories, cultural relativism and comprehensive universalism. So what we're getting now is a description of how these other two theories relate to deliberative universalists, right? Now, if we need more information on our cultural relativist or our comprehensive universalism, we're obviously going to come back here and get it. We do want to have a pretty good idea of what they are moving forward, but we'll come back for the examples and the details. So, with our cultural relativism, what was the main idea of cultural relativism? You guys tell me real quick. Yeah, it depends on where you're from, right? Everyone has something a little bit different. They have their own distinct values. Now, what about those comprehensive universalists? What did they think? Yeah, that there is a correct answer, right? So ultimately what we're seeing is that deliberative universalists fall somewhere in between, and these two ideas are kind of at each end of that spectrum. All right, so let's try a couple of questions here now that we've got some of that passage in. The author discusses the additional theories of cultural relativism and comprehensive universalism in order to. What type of question is this? What type of question is this? All right, so we have a couple different answers here, and that is okay. Typically, when we see the words in order to, that tells us we're dealing with a function question. Why was this information included? So we kind of just talked about that. We talked about the structure of this paragraph. So I'm going to let you use that past discussion and go ahead and get your answers into the poll for me. And I'm going to close it up in 3, 2, and 1. We look to be on the same page with this one. 100% of us here, we're all about answer choice B. We could eliminate the others. We could quickly see this one was exactly what we were dealing with. We had two contrasting ideas. We knew the one that we wanted to talk about, the deliberative universalism, falls somewhere kind of in the middle of those ideas. 100% pink star. Let's rock out on question 35, just as well as you've done this one. Suppose an intelligent extraterrestrial species, well this sounds like it's dealing with something we didn't talk about, was discovered which shared none of the moral values common to human cultures. Which view from the passage would be most strengthened by this discovery? This is definitely a reasoning beyond the text because we have ET here. Okay, so let's figure out what the point is. The point is that they discovered this species which shared none of the moral values common to human cultures. All right, so what does that have to do with what we just read? So we're trying to figure out how this relates to the three themes we just read about: cultural relativism, deliberative universalism, comprehensive universalism. In this case, they were extremely different. Now we want to know which view would be most strengthened by this. Okay, so we're asking ourselves which view held that things really depended on where you came from. Which idea would be strengthened that we don't have one common set of goals here? Yeah, cultural relativism, right? We said that comprehensive universalism held that it's the same for everyone, deliberative universal was somewhere in the middle, and cultural relativism was the one that said it was different depending on where you are. So this is definitely going to be the one that's strengthened based on our ET. Speaking of, I watched that movie for the first time this weekend. It's fantastic. All right, let's read the rest of this passage and then wrap up with a couple more questions here. So if cultural relativism and comprehensive universalism are black and white approaches to moral theory, we already said that, they're extreme ends of the spectrum. Deliberative universalism is gray, somewhere in the middle, totally makes sense. On the one hand, deliberative universalists assume that the fact that some moral values appear to transcend all cultural barriers must indicate that there is a set of innate universal human values. On the other hand, they reserve the right to debate the merits of moral principles that are commonly held but not universally subscribed to. This is pretty much more of what we already expected here, right? This is nothing new. We kind of already said that it's somewhere in the middle, that we're going to meet in the middle of those other two ideas. All right, last paragraph here. One critique. Just based on those two words, we know what's coming here. We're getting critiques to deliberative universalism. So go ahead and tell me, what would we want to throw into our passage outline for this paragraph? What would we throw into our passage outline? Of course, we're going to scan through it, but we pretty much from the first sentence know the topic. Yeah, so it has faults, and we're going to be talking about those critiques right here. Very nice. Okay, so we now have read all of our paragraphs. Go ahead and tell me, what is the goal of this entire thing? Paragraph 5 is an awesome example of how we only needed one sentence to use in our passage outline. So what's the goal? What is the goal? See a bunch of you typing. So Kaylin, that's a little big picture to show that morality is difficult to define. That's a little broader than we might want to go for this. How can we kind of narrow that a little bit? So Brandon says to explain deliberative universalism and give background. Okay, that's getting a little bit more specific. I like it. So really the point of this was to discuss deliberative universalism, explain it in the context of the other things, and show some of its problems, right? Because that's how we wrap this up. So to describe deliberative universalism and problems in the context of these other ideas would be a great way to show this. We want to make sure that with our goal, we're not getting too broad and we're not getting too narrow. And I know that sounds difficult, right? You don't just right in the middle. But with practice, you will get really good at that goal. You'll also be able to tell if this is something you're struggling with, if you tend to miss a lot of main idea questions. So as you're reviewing your Why I Missed It sheets, check that out. If you're missing main idea, you probably need to practice creating better goal statements. All right, let's try a couple of questions. Based on the passage, tells us we're going to need the passage, some detail maybe. Critics of deliberative universalism could plausibly claim that. Okay, so what part of this passage do we need? Yeah, paragraph 5, absolutely. This shouldn't be too bad. I'm going to actually give you some time now that we've discussed this and that you guys have read this before. I want to see how we're doing here. So I'm opening up that poll. Take about 20 seconds. And I'm going to close it up in 3, 2, and 1. Tell me this, did you actually need to go back to the paragraph? Nope, not really. We pretty much already knew what the problem with deliberative universalism, right? That it fell somewhere in between. So it completely makes sense that if we were saying that these other theories had problems, that this would probably have some of those same problems. So answer choice B, which it looks like our poll accidentally cleared. But I can tell you 100% of you are right on the money with answer choice B in this question. Don't fall for those answer choices that are getting out of scope, like answer choice D, talking about human rights. That's not what we were getting at in this passage. All right, let's try another one. The author uses the hypothetical example of a world of dictators in order to. This is another function question. Okay, so we need to go to paragraph 5, but how do we tackle a function question? How do we tackle it? Hey, you're going to read around it. And of course, you want to pay close attention to the main point of that entire paragraph. Don't get too narrow. Pay attention to why that paragraph was included. So we said in our passage outline, this was all about critiquing deliberative universalism. So I will give you just a couple of seconds to go back to the passage, read around it, and get your answers into the poll. This one should be pretty quick. Go ahead. Closing it up in 3, 2, and 1. And I don't know what's going on with our poll. It's acting crazy, but I can tell you that 100% of us were totally on board with answer choice A, and that's absolutely correct. That's the only one here that really gets at the point of this paragraph. In this case, we probably didn't even need to go back and read around it that much because all of these other answer choices do not get on board with the topic of paragraph 5. So again, in function questions, first utilize your passage outline, then read around the statement that was included. So awesome job here. In our last about 10 minutes, we're going to take a look at some of those correct answers and what makes them correct. So you've probably spent quite a bit of time in your classes talking about wrong answer pathology. So remind me really quick, what are those wrong answer pathologies we can see? There are 4 of them. What are they? What are they? There's 4. Yeah, Brandon's got all of them. Distortion, opposite, faulty use of detail. Oh, and he was missing one. And out of scope. That's absolutely right. Now, some of the things we know to look for in our wrong answer choices are going to be that language of distortions, right? So bad answers have extreme language when asked what must be true. And they can also have, this is one we're probably not as used to, but bad answer choices can also have really vague language when we're asked to add evidence. So on our strengthen weaken questions where we want to include something that's going to strengthen, we might want stronger language. So we've got to be careful of what type of question we're dealing with. So if we're dealing with a what must be true, a good answer would have moderating language like might be, can, instead of always, must, only. Now, if we're asking to strengthen or weaken something by adding evidence, we want that to be strong and specific. So let's do a little practicing here. Now, we're not going to be looking at the actual passage that goes with this. We're just going to be looking at language and answer choices to help us out. So with which of the following statements is the author most likely to agree? Now, there are going to be times where if you had a really, really extreme author, that extreme answer choices could be okay. But typically that's not the case, and I'll tell you, in this case, it was not. So let's look at each answer choice and figure out what makes it right or wrong. So answer choice A, is there anything we should be wary of? Is there anything we should be wary of in answer choice A? Remember, this is a most likely to agree. What does the author think? Is there anything in answer choice A that stands out as extreme? So Draven says challenge. That could be as well. I'm going to highlight one word in answer choice A and B that stands out to me. When you see the word should, what does that tell you? You see the word should. What does that tell you? This is telling you the author has made some point. The author has expressed their opinion and said this is what should be done. That's a pretty strong point of view. If the author is arguing something, then it's possible for that to be true. But if they're not, this can sound pretty extreme. Now, answer choice D also has some extreme language. When we see here extraneous and misguided, that is pretty extreme as well. So our most moderating answer choice, and the one that ends up being correct here, is answer choice C. Literature that is worthwhile often can only be appreciated by a few. Now, what we're seeing here that makes this moderating often can, okay? Often can makes this a moderating answer choice as opposed to an extreme one. All right, let's look at some more here. So in question 3, which of the following, if true, would most weaken the author's contention that the study of literature is declining? So here we're dealing with a weaken question. So do we want something that is more vague and moderating, or do we want something strong and specific? Yeah, in this case, we want strong and specific. So another great reason why we need to pay attention to what type of question we're dealing with. All right, so let's look at these. Many students have been able to apply. Many students, that sounds a little bit weak, okay? So let's pay attention to that. Let's keep going. Some universities also sounds pretty moderating. Let's keep going. More and more students are interested. Still kind of moderating, but sounds a little better than the others. And finally, answer choice D. Because of student interest, universities have added courses that focus on the close reading of Shakespeare and Milton. Do we have any moderating language in answer choice D? No, answer choice D is strong and specific. It's the only one that doesn't have that moderating language, so answer choice D has got to be our correct answer. Even without knowing, in this case you guys have read this before, but even without relating this to the passage, paying any attention, we can use only language in answer choices to determine what types of answer choices are wrong and what types of answer choices are correct. All right, let's look at two more. One more we're dealing with something that we're looking to get rid of extremes, and another where we're looking at finding strong and specific answer choices. So, question 49. According to the author, most psychologists would agree with which of the following statements about intelligence? So tell me, should I be looking for extreme or eliminating extreme? Should I be looking for extreme or eliminating extreme? We want to be eliminating here because we're asking which of the ones would the author agree with, and unless we know that the author is really extreme, we're going to want to eliminate extreme language. So go ahead, take about 10 seconds to get your answer into the poll, just utilizing the language of the answer choices. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and broadcast, and again, we lost the poll. But I can tell you 100% of you were all about answer choice D, which is absolutely correct. Now, some of the things we'd pay attention to in these other ones is best measured, the concept of intelligence is useless, and we're seeing is improved. These are all showing a lot of opinion, whereas answer choice D has no extremes and is pretty descriptive, which matches the tone of this author. So awesome job there. Only one more question to go. So this last question, which of the following, if true, would most weaken the author's argument? Now we said when we're dealing with a strength and weaken type of question, we want something specific as opposed to something vague. So go ahead and take about 15 seconds to look at these answer choices using the language only and get your answers into the poll. Remember, we want strong and specific. I'm going to close it up in 3, 2, and 1. Sorry guys, again, I don't know what is going on with this poll, but I will tell you we were split between answer choices A and D on this one, so let's talk about both. So A, folk wisdom and science seldom agree in their explanations of natural phenomena. What makes answer choice A kind of not what we're looking for? What language here? Yeah, absolutely, Kaylin. Seldom makes this more moderating instead of strong and specific. In answer choice B, selective deprivation makes this a bit moderating. In answer choice C, some species, that makes it moderating. Whereas answer choice D, measures of attention and memory remain stable regardless of time spent in sleep. This is specific and exactly what we'd be looking for in a weekend question. With that, we are done for the night. It was a pleasure to spend the last hour with you. I do hope to see you for more channel sessions very soon, so stick around for some more tonight, and I will see you again another day. Have a great evening.